The shoulder is the most unstable joint in the human body. Greatest range of motion, highest rate of injury, and the single structure that determines whether a physique looks powerful or just thick. 6 specific movements correct this. Most people do none of them. Here is what each one actually does. The only shoulder movement that produces a measurable acute testosterone spike forces your entire spine into compression the moment it begins. Overhead press. The Spartan phalanx demanded that soldiers drive a spear and shield overhead for hours. The overhead press is the closest modern training comes to replicating that mechanical demand, and the reason it matters hormonally is simple. It recruits more total muscle mass than any other shoulder movement. More muscle mass under load equals a larger hormonal signal. The key form cue is keeping the elbows slightly in front of the bar at the start, not flared to the sides. Flared elbows shift the load from the deltoid to the upper pec and reduce shoulder activation by roughly 30%. 3 sets of 5, heavy, controlled descent. This is the foundation. But the overhead press builds strength and hormonal output across all 3 deltoid heads simultaneously, which means it develops everything, but specializes in nothing. The muscle responsible for the visual width of the shoulder, the one that determines whether your silhouette reads narrow or broad, has a loading window most people miss entirely. The lateral deltoid activates maximally in the first 30 degrees of arm abduction and shuts off almost completely by the time most people finish their rep. Lateral raise. The lateral head of the deltoid is not a large muscle, it is a precise one. Its functional range starts at dead hang and peaks at 30 degrees. After that, the trapezius takes over and the lateral head becomes a passenger. This is why most lateral raises, done with speed and momentum, produce trapped soreness and no shoulder width. The fix is a 1-second pause at 30 degrees on every rep, and a 4-second eccentric on the way back down. That pause forces the lateral head to produce force exactly when its fibers are most active. That 4-second descent doubles total time under tension without a single extra rep. 3 sets of 15. The Spartan warrior beside you does not swing. He does not rush. He pauses. Width is built in the moment everyone else skips. But width without rear depth is a visual illusion. And the muscle at the back of the shoulder is the one that prevented every Spartan shield arm from tearing out of its socket under sustained phalanx pressure. The posterior deltoid is completely absent from most modern shoulder routines, despite being the direct structural counterbalance to every pressing movement you have ever done. Rear delt fly. Every bench press, every overhead press, every push-up in your life loads the anterior deltoid and pulls the shoulder joint forward. The posterior deltoid is the only muscle that reverses that pull, and when it is weak, the ball of your humerus sits anterior in its socket. That is what impingement is. That is what a rotator cuff tear is. The rear delt fly corrects this. Inclined bench or bent over, elbows soft. Lead with the elbow, not the hand. Stop when your arm reaches parallel to the floor. 3 sets of 15. This is not accessory work. This is structural maintenance for a joint that cannot be surgically rebuilt to its original function. The Spartan shield arm absorbed repeated lateral impact for the duration of a battle. The posterior deltoid absorbed that force. Without it, the joint fails, not eventually, progressively. But structural depth is still not the same thing as structural stability. The 4 muscles that actually hold the entire shoulder architecture together under load are the ones most people have never consciously trained once in their life. There is a movement that simultaneously trains the 2 muscles most responsible for preventing shoulder surgery, and it looks so simple that most people in a gym walk past it without stopping. Face pull. The face pull targets the infraspinatus and teres minor, 2 of the 4 rotator cuff muscles, through external rotation under direct load. No compound pressing or pulling movement reaches both in this plane. The protocol is specific. Cable or band at face height, pull toward your nose, elbows high, and at the end of the rep, drive your hands apart. That final outward drive is the external rotation. Without it, the movement becomes a rear delt exercise when you can do better with a fly. 3 sets of 15, no momentum, controlled tempo. Every Spartan who held a spear overhead in extended combat was relying on this exact muscular function. They trained it through endless loaded overhead work, not because they understood the anatomy, but because the battlefield punished everyone whose rotator cuff failed first. Pressing strength, lateral width, rear structural depth, and rotational stability are now loaded. One movement remains, the one that requires nothing but gravity and your own body weight, and the one that Spartan soldiers built pressing strength on during campaigns when no equipment existed. The bodyweight movement that produces more anterior deltoid activation than a standard dumbbell press requires no equipment, no gym, and no weight. Pike push-up. The pike push-up positions your body in an inverted V. That angle shifts the load from the chest, where a flat push-up loads directly onto the anterior deltoid and upper trapezius. Hands slightly wider than shoulders, hips high, lower until the crown of your head nearly touches the floor. The neurological demand is higher than a seated press because stabilizing an inverted load forces the rotator cuff to fire isometrically throughout the entire movement, which means you are training shoulder pressing strength and rotator cuff endurance in the same rep. Start with 3 sets of 8. As that becomes easy, elevate your feet. The higher the feet, the closer your body approaches a vertical pressing angle, and the more every head of the deltoid must fire to control the descent. The Spartan does not need a barbell to stay strong. He needs the floor and the angle. But all 5 movements so far load the shoulder in separate planes: anterior, lateral, posterior, rotational, vertical. There is one movement that runs all 3 heads through their full range in a single rep, in sequence as one continuous arc. It was built by a man who held the title of the world's best-built physique 7 times in a row. The only pressing movement that rotates through the full origin to insertion arc of all 3 deltoid heads inside a single rep was not designed by a scientist. It was designed by observation. Arnold Press. A standard overhead press moves in one plane. The Arnold Press starts with palms facing you, loading the anterior head from the bottom of the rep, rotates outward through the mid-range, recruiting the lateral head as the arm abducts, and finishes with palms forward at the top, pressing through the same final range as a standard press. The rotation is not stylistic. It maps the actual anatomical arc of the deltoid fibers, loading them through their full functional range in one movement instead of isolating each in a separate exercise. 3 sets of 10, strict tempo, no elbow flare at the top. This is why Schwarzenegger's shoulder development was structurally disproportionate to his entire era. Not genetics alone, but one mechanical insight about how the deltoid actually moves versus how everyone else was training it. The Spartan protagonist running this entire sequence does not choose these 6 movements because they are popular. He chooses them because each one covers exactly one plane the shoulder operates in, and together they cover all of them. The shoulder only becomes structurally durable when every plane it can move in is trained under load. Anterior, lateral, posterior, rotational, vertical, full arc. Miss one plane and the joint degrades. Not eventually, but progressively, with every rep you do that loads the others without a counterbalance. The Spartans had no choice but to train them all, neither do you.